So talking about this topic, as a general rule, preference should be given to the rights of students over the requirements of teachers in video-mediated classrooms. I think we have to kind of set an expectation of what we're going for before we dive into the topic. And here I'm assuming that when it comes to a teacher implementing a policy like no chewing gum, wear a shirt, don't eat food on the Zoom classroom, we're going to want to, when observing that policy, whether or not it lends itself to being good for an educational environment, we want to focus more on, are we violating students' rights to privacy, or are we going to be going along with just what the teacher assumes to be the best decision? For AF here, based on the first speech that I've gotten, it seems like that our expectation of privacy K through 12 students and beyond is a lot more important than what we would give a teacher for their expectations of how they should run their own classroom. And I completely agree with that interpretation of this topic. And I'm going to go into a few key areas just to kind of set up my speech here. And those key areas are, I'm going to start off with the privacy weighing mechanism. I'm going to talk about that, whether or not we should use it, and then why privacy might not be the best way to go about this topic. Two, I'm going to jump into the expectations of both just a learning environment, the students and the teachers when they log on to Zoom. I'm going to move into the example that was provided, kind of dissect that a little bit and see whether or not that kind of goes for the neg or for the AF. And then finally, I'm going to kind of take a look at what your implemented policy would look like, what my implemented policy would look like, and then which one lends itself to giving students K through 12 and beyond a better learning environment. I feel like if we're implementing a policy in a classroom and we are trying to prevent disorder, or we're trying to make it a learning environment for all students to be able to come into the Zoom classroom and get what they need out of it, because times are so radically different now, I think that our weighing mechanism should be what lends itself to a learning environment the best, as opposed to which protects student privacy the most. I mean, I understand your concern for the privacy rights, but I mean, when you go to class, you're not allowed to bring a gun. You have a right to owning a firearm, but it goes against a learning environment, so you're not allowed to do that in class. When you're in class, you're not allowed to start shouting things. I mean, you have a right to free speech, but when you're in class, it's a learning environment. You're not expected to maintain that right in the middle class when you're listening from a lecturer, and you don't necessarily have a right to privacy. So I don't see how we would be able to maintain that explicit right to privacy, especially if you were trying to go into a learning environment that you're going to have consistently day in and day out for these specific time blocks. You're setting up your laptop, you know where you're going to set it up at. I don't see how a student's expectation of privacy can override that of a teacher trying to give a good learning environment. So moving down to the expectations of an online Zoom class. So, I mean, what are your expectations when you go into class, right? You're expecting to learn. You're expecting to have a non-disturbed environment. You're just going to listen to the teacher. You might do some examples. You might interact a bit, but your expectation is to learn. The teacher's expectation is to teach, and everyone is expected to behave in an according manner to make sure that, I mean, everyone lends themselves to make sure that you're not disturbing class. You're not essentially wasting someone else's money because you can't follow the rules. You don't want to follow the rules. So going into a classroom, you're expected to learn. And that's why I'm saying that our weighing mechanism should be what helps students learn the best. Student expectations, you're expected to follow the rules. I mean, if you were going in person, you were expected to follow the rules. There's really no reason that should be changed because we're in distance. And in order to maintain a sense of normalcy, we should probably be expected to follow the same rules that we were expected to follow a couple weeks ago before we were going in Zoom class. So, I mean, it's not unreasonable to expect students to follow the same rules that they were following before. If you weren't allowed to bring a BB gun to class in person, you're not allowed to bring a BB gun or flash a BB gun, brandish a BB gun on camera, especially when it's more difficult to tell if it's a real gun or not. And a teacher's expectations. What are teachers expected to do? They're expected to look out for the health, safety, and well-being of their students. They're expected to teach. They're expected to help their students learn. They're expected to be kind of that resource. And they're also expected to keep order in class. So when we're looking at a policy that says no chewing gum, you have to wear a shirt, I mean, you might feel like your rights are being violated because you're not allowed to have that individual autonomy to chew gum or the autonomy to wear a shirt or not wear a shirt because you want to. But you need to think of the class as a whole. The teacher is there to set standards to make sure that everyone is following it, a base guideline to make sure that no one is deviating from the norm enough that you are disrupting the entire class and you're making sure that no one is able to learn. I mean, if you learn better without a shirt on, but that makes 20 people in the class uncomfortable and so they can't learn, then I'm sorry, but you're going to have to keep your shirt on. If you're chewing gum, but you're not muted and it's smacking, then the teacher can ask you to stop chewing gum because it is being disruptive to the other students. The same as, I guess, putting a BB gun on camera. I mean, if someone feels uncomfortable because of that, all of a sudden you are violating, I mean, their right to an education in that setting. And the expectation going into a Zoom class is your ability to learn, not your ability to show off a toy. Along with that, going into your example, actually, I mean, I would agree that maybe the teacher in the school system probably, I guess, overstepped, right? You are in your own home. It is a little bit different showing a BB gun on camera, but the reaction of the teacher, the only thing they can do in that situation is follow school policy, right? It's difficult to tell whether or not a gun is a BB gun or a real gun on camera. So, I mean, from the teacher's perspective, they might have assumed that it was a real gun, that it was laying around, that a 9-year-old student was able to hold it up or put it next to him. That's concerning as an educator. That is concerning as a person who cares about the students. So you'd want to investigate that immediately. All of a sudden, that opens the door up to, I mean, is it an abusive household? Are they neglectful parents? Is the student running around with a loaded gun on class? Are they violent in nature? Or are they going to get into a whole bunch of different issues that might affect the classroom, might affect their learning ability? So, I mean, the reaction of the teacher in that situation was, I follow the only rules that I know how to. I'm going to report it to the administration, and then we're going to take it from there because, I mean, better safe than sorry. And I guess for the entire policy of where I'm trying to get at for this specific topic is essentially better safe than sorry. I mean, if we look at your policy, getting into the policy side of this, if we look at your policy in terms of we're going to respect students' privacy over that of the teachers, like with judgment. Imagine if I had just a swastika on the wall right behind me, just a Nazi flag. I mean, my privacy, my rights, it's something that I want to show in class, and according to your policy, I'm able to show that in class, and a teacher cannot ask me to take that down. But I mean, imagine if you had, I don't know, students that have a close history to, I guess, the Holocaust, or you just have students who are uncomfortable with fascist ideologies, which is completely understandable. And looking at that on my camera would not allow them to focus on classroom material. That is not a policy I want to go with, because all of a sudden you're getting into the nuance of who has more rights than other people. Is my right to an education less valuable than your right to privacy? That is not a policy we want to go through day in and day out. And if we're looking at students in terms of, first of all, if we're going to protect students' privacy more, students have the ability to make their own room private. I mean, there's an expectation of, if it's going to come across camera, then it's really not a private issue. You can keep things you want to keep private off camera. There's no reason you have to show that to people. And the older you get, I mean, you're able to control that more. I mean, if you're a third grader, I don't know what your expectation of privacy is. And we shouldn't even be using privacy. We should be using, does it lend itself to an educational institution and environment, because we are there to learn. For my policy, I mean, as long as the teacher is focused on, let's make a learning environment, we will institute rules, we will institute policies based on what makes a fair playing field for everyone to learn the best that they can learn. I believe that as a policy we should be using. And that's why I believe that you should be voting negative during this